What if creativity isn't a single moment of brilliance, but a journey through four distinct stages? We often judge our creative days by results, by what we accomplish, by the harvest we reap. But true creativity doesn't work that way. Don't judge each day by the harvest you reap, but by the seeds you plant. Robert Louis Stevenson. Some days are for planting, some days are for tending, some days are for waiting, and some days, finally, are for harvesting. In this chapter, we go beyond inspiration and discipline. We break creativity into four essential stages, each with its own purpose, rhythm, and reward. Because real creative work isn't linear, it's cyclical, it's layered, it's human. Listen carefully, and you'll discover not just how to create, but when, where, and why your best ideas are born. The four stages of creativity. Don't judge each day by the harvest you reap, but by the seeds you plant. Robert Louis Stevenson. February 14th, 2011. Above the couples strolling along Fulton Parkway, from the top floor at the end of a horseshoe-shaped brick courtyard building, the warm glow of lamplight bleeds from my windows into the darkness. Laid out across my living room floor is a whiteboard. My knees resting on the rug, my fingers search the fan of yellow sticky notes peeking from the edge of a brick-thick art history book. I open the book and splay it onto the floor, to the top left of the whiteboard. Below it, a smaller book on typography is at the ready. To the right of the art history book, a graphic design history book. Further clockwise, a stapled photocopy of a library reference book is folded open to a highlight-striped page. Sticky notes in fluorescent blue, orange, and green are strewn across the whiteboard. Dry erase marker lines connect the notes, supplemented by bullet point thoughts written on the board. My living room looks like a detective's office from a murder mystery movie. My phone buzzes on the hardwood. A friend is inviting me to an anti-Valentine's Day party. To keep it simple, I lie. Can't tonight. Writing. Smiley face. In truth, I won't write very much tonight. From what I do write, in the form of notes, not a single word will make it directly into my manuscript. My laptop is nowhere to be seen. Some reference material and my own thoughts are my only Valentine's Day date. I'm now almost 3 months into writing my first book. I've come a long way since ruminating on that Costa Rican road. When I first started writing, I thought I merely had to write 250 words a day to arrive at my target word count. I soon learned it wasn't going to happen that way. I won't write anything tonight, but I'm still writing. I know that I'm writing because I know that, thanks to today's research ritual, tomorrow will be easier. I'll wake up, I'll walk over the creaky boards and into my office, and I'll rest my fingertips on the keyboard. I won't have any reference material or notes from the night before. The sticky notes will be in the trash, the marker scribbles will be erased, and the books will be shut and sitting on the shelf. Still, as if by magic, my fingers will move and words that make sense together will appear on the screen. By this point, I've learned that if I haven't done a research session like this one, the outcome will be different. A dull pain will fill my stomach. My spine and shoulders will curl forward. My teeth will grit, and my brow will wrinkle. Suddenly, something else will capture my attention. My desk will need dusting. My mouth will miss the taste of green tea. Or I'll feel a chill and need to fetch a sweater. So for now, I'm the stonemason mixing mortar, the painter stretching a new canvas, the farmer tilling the soil. I'm laying the groundwork for what is yet to come. Ideas never come to a wearied brain. In 1891, German scientist and philosopher Hermann Helmholtz celebrated his 70th birthday. At the party thrown in his honor, he rose to give a speech. He reflected on his illustrious career. How did he achieve one groundbreaking discovery after another? In physics, he formulated the concept of energy conservation. In art, he devised theories on color perception that influenced Impressionist painters. In medicine, he invented the ophthalmoscope. But Helmholtz was about to make one more contribution, this time to our understanding of creativity. He said, "Inspiration comes quite suddenly, without effort, like a flash of thought. So far as my experience goes, it never comes to a wearied brain, or at the writing table. I must first have turned my problem over and over in all directions till I can see its twists and windings in my mind's eye and run through it freely without writing it down. And it's never possible to get to this point without a long period of preliminary work. And then, when the consequent fatigue of this stage has been recovered from, there must be an hour of perfect bodily recuperation and peaceful comfort before the kindly inspiration rewards one. Often it comes in the morning on waking. It came most readily when I went out to climb the wooded hills in sunny weather. It wasn't until years after I wrote my first book that I discovered this passage, but when I did, my experience writing that first book came back in a flash. This was why I had learned to perform this ritual with a whiteboard, sticky notes, and books strewn about the floor. I was turning my problem over in all sides. When it came time to write, it didn't matter whether I kept my notes. The angles and complexities were now in my head. I couldn't go straight from research into writing. I had a wearied brain. Instead, I needed to wait until the morning, my hour of perfect bodily recuperation and peaceful comfort. That's when the writing would finally come easily. Helmholtz's speech probably brings back memories for you too. You remember times when you felt hopelessly blocked. You were writing a report, designing a logo, or trying to make a tough life decision. You gathered all the information you could and racked your brain for a solution. You panicked, certain you would never gain clarity. You began to question your abilities. You may even have questioned your right to exist. But then, seemingly out of nowhere, the solution appeared. This time, the writing flowed. The perfect logo appeared in your mind, or the decision that was once unclear suddenly became obvious. It might have happened when you sat down to take another crack at the problem, but more likely, it happened somewhere else. You were taking a shower, you were playing catch with your kid, or you were waiting at the checkout counter at the grocery store. Social psychologist Graham Wallace also related to Helmholtz's speech. 35 years after the fact, he formalized Helmholtz's observations on the creative process into what he called 4 stages of control. These 4 stages make the random and mysterious creative process seem a little less random and mysterious. The first stage is preparation. During preparation, you're learning everything you can about the problem. As Helmholtz would say, you turn it over and over in all directions until you can see its twists and windings in your mind's eye. You know it so well you can talk about it or brainstorm solutions without referring to your notes. The second stage is incubation. Incubation is the period during which the consequent fatigue of the preparation stage reaches the point of having been recovered from. Incubation happens anytime you're not actively working on the problem. You could be working on something else, taking a walk, or even sleeping. The third stage is illumination. Illumination is the aha moment, the moment neuroscientists would call insight. It's when the solution comes quite suddenly. It's a flash of thought that arrives without effort. Moments of illumination are the moments that make creativity seem so mysterious because they are sudden and unpredictable. Your breakthrough idea may come while making breakfast, clipping your toenails, or climbing the wooded hills in sunny weather. Finally, Wallace suggested a 4th stage, which wasn't mentioned in Helmholtz's speech. Verification is when you evaluate the idea you arrived at during the illumination stage. You check your calculations add up. You check your facts and correct your grammar. You put the finishing touches on your masterpiece. So the 4 stages of control, which scientists widely refer to as the 4 stages of creativity, are preparation, incubation, illumination, and verification. More than 120 years after Helmholtz's observations, still stand up. Mentioning Wallace's 4 stages is practically a requirement for any research paper on creativity. In the first few months of writing my first book, though I didn't know it at the time, I had discovered the power of working with these stages. Though I knew I wouldn't write a single useful word in my evening research session, I was okay with that. I had tried too many times to sit down and write without doing a deep dive like this, and it had always burned me out. Thanks to research sessions like this one, I knew the things I explored tonight would connect tomorrow.
Furthermore, I knew that the things I wrote the next morning wouldn't be ready for print. There would be awkward sentence structures, unnecessary explanations, or things I'd need to look up one last time. My research session would be my preparation, my night's sleep would provide incubation, and my morning writing session would bring illumination. Later, when I edited my writing, I would do my verification. By being comfortable working according to the 4 stages, I had reduced the pain of writing. Since it was no longer painful, I was less likely to procrastinate. I knew not to push too hard to reach a solution, so I stopped burning out.
From the inside out. Robert McKee is the foremost instructor on screenwriting. His students include Russell Brand, Stephen Pressfield, and Julia Roberts. Students of his screenwriting seminar have won more than 60 Oscars and 200 Emmys. We think of a screenplay as mostly dialogue. The only words that reach us are spoken on the screen, after all. It then follows that to write a screenplay, you simply need to start writing dialogue. But McKee teaches screenwriting in a different way. The work follows stages that aren't unlike the 4 stages of creativity. In his book, Story, Substance, Structure, Style, and the Principles of Screenwriting, McKee calls this process writing from the inside out. Instead of writing dialogue and revising over and over, the writer starts with the idea, works on the fundamentals of the story, and saves the dialogue for last. The writer starts with a step outline, a series of short statements that describe what happens in the story. Meanwhile, they're also researching and writing other details that will never reach the final script. Background on the biographies of the characters, about how the world in which the story is set works, and what themes will be explored through the story. Then the writer tests the story by pitching it to friends over coffee. The writer is listening to themselves while sharing the story. They're watching their friends listen. Are their eyes widening? Are they leaning forward in their seats? If the story as told over coffee can hold someone's interest for 10 minutes, it's ready for the next step. The writer then writes what McKee calls a treatment, in which individual scenes from the step outline are expanded into descriptive paragraphs. Only after all this, months of work, do they finally write a screenplay, including dialogue. As McKee says, the wise writer puts off the writing of dialogue for as long as possible. Instead of trying to come up with a brilliant screenplay out of thin air, McKee advises his students to do a tremendous amount of preparation. Only then can they have moments of illumination. Over the course of many months, there will naturally be moments of incubation, sleeping, eating, walking, or generally going about life. All along, the story is also going through verification, as the writer tests it with friends, does background research, and examines the story's fundamentals. This brings us to an important truth of the 4 stages of creativity. These stages don't always progress one after another from start to finish. In McKee's prescribed process, you're doing verification, such as testing the story over coffee, amidst your preparation. You may iterate amongst various parts of the process, as I described in the chapter about the linear work distortion in my book, The Heart to Start. Screenwriter John Bokenkamp begins with stream of consciousness writing, which may contain dialogue. Preparation and illumination are happening all at once. Additionally, most creative works consist of many ideas strung together. You can't write a compelling story without many moments of illumination. It needs to consist of one brilliant turn after another, with the characters and situation interacting to move the plot forward. A great painting may call for one brilliant brushstroke after another, each stroke representing the crook of an elbow or the leaves of a tree with breathtaking economy. It takes countless journeys from preparation to incubation to illumination to connect these ideas. All along, you're verifying your approach. The amount of time it takes to progress through the 4 stages of creativity can vary wildly. Sometimes it takes years or even decades to arrive at a solution. Elizabeth Bishop took 20 years to finish her poem, The Moose, while working on other projects.
More commonly, you're skipping amongst these stages for weeks or days, yet sometimes you can go from problem to solution seemingly all at once. Creativity is short-term memory management. Don't push too hard on creative blocks. Instead, soften them through preparation. Why? The answer lies in the limitations of the human mind. When we come up with a creative idea, we connect seemingly unrelated concepts, but to find connections that work, we need to try many different combinations. When we try to power through a difficult problem all at once, we limit the number of combinations we can try. We don't find a solution, we get frustrated, and we burn out. We try to use a limited amount of brain power to do a lot of heavy lifting. It's like trying to do a push-up with the support of a single pinky finger. Our minds are divided into two parts, short-term memory and long-term memory. We can store a seemingly endless amount of information in our long-term memory, our childhood phone number, the name of our second-grade crush, or a commercial jingle we heard 20 years ago. But our short-term memory isn't so powerful. It can hold only a handful of things at once. This is why credit card numbers are divided into chunks of 4 or 5 digits. As we enter them into a form, we only have to remember a few digits at a time. Those numbers pass into our short-term memory, but only for a moment. As soon as we don't need them, they're gone. While writing my first book, I settled into my nighttime research ritual because it freed up my short-term memory. Whenever I tried to research while writing, I got stuck. I know now that it's because I was trying to use more brain power than I had in the moment. I was trying to hold new knowledge from my reference material in my short-term memory. It's no mistake that our short-term memory is also called our working memory. If we're trying to store information in our short-term memory, we have less brain power left over to do any other work. So, as I was holding new concepts in my working memory, I was also using my working memory to test connections between those concepts. I was trying to learn new things while also trying to find novel and useful combinations amongst those things. It's no wonder I got blocked early in my writing process. But when I spent an evening researching, it gave the information a chance to pass from my short-term memory into my long-term memory. Once new information was in my long-term memory, I no longer had to use my short-term memory to hold on to those concepts. During my morning writing session, I could apply all my brain power toward connecting concepts to form new ideas. In Your Brain at Work, neuroscientist David Rock compares your short-term and long-term memory capacities to a theater. Your short-term memory is the stage. Your long-term memory is the audience in the theater. As you're trying to connect concepts to generate ideas, it's like you're pulling actors on stage to act in scenes. But the more actors you have on the stage, the more difficult your scene becomes to follow. So at some point, you need to send some actors off stage. When I tried to research while I was writing, I was bringing new actors onto the stage. These actors were completely new concepts, or concepts I was reviewing, so they had to come in from backstage. At the same time, I was bringing actors in from the audience. These actors were concepts I already knew in my long-term memory. There was so much activity on the stage, it was hard to develop coherent scenes. What I needed to do was manage the stage better. I needed to exclusively bring new concepts into my short-term memory. I needed then to allow those concepts to sink into my long-term memory. I needed to bring these concepts onto the stage, like actors from backstage, and let them play in scenes. I took notes. I experimented with connecting concepts in those notes. I sketched on my whiteboard or arranged the notes in clusters to form a mind map. I needed to give new concepts enough space to eventually transition into the audience. I needed to let concepts in my short-term memory sink into my long-term memory. We beat ourselves up when we can't reach a solution right away. We imagine our creative heroes coming up with masterpieces right on the spot. In reality, it never works that way.
Michelangelo was no god. Take, for example, Michelangelo. A famous story told of Michelangelo is that when asked how he carved the David, Michelangelo said, "I simply removed everything that wasn't David." You also may have seen unfinished sculptures by Michelangelo, where one layer after another of marble has been chipped away, the sculpture emerging from the block of marble as if it were rising up from a pool of water. You imagine Michelangelo standing in front of a gigantic block of marble, expertly revealing a three-dimensional model from his mind's eye, layer by layer, like the inverse of a three-dimensional printer. Besides the fact that there's no proof Michelangelo actually said that about carving the David, you should remove this image from your mind. Michelangelo did an enormous amount of preparation for all of his art. Before touching a chisel to stone, Michelangelo had his sculpture all planned out. He presented his patron with a small model made with wax, clay, or various other materials. Before building that model, he had made numerous sketches. All the while, he was drawing on a stadium's worth of knowledge to put actors on his stage. He kept a library of clay-sculpted body parts, hands, feet, torsos, etc. Many of these were replicas drawn from Greek and Roman sculptures he had studied. Michelangelo studied the human body so intensely, we still don't have names for some of the anatomical details we see in the drawings he made while dissecting corpses. His long-term memory was a treasure trove of information on anatomy, just waiting to be conjured up and mixed and matched into his next masterpiece. There's a reason why the unfinished sculptures of Michelangelo appear as if they are emerging from a pool of water. They quite literally were doing just that. His biographer, Vasari, described Michelangelo's process of translating one of his preliminary models into a finished piece. He lowered the model into a tub of water. He then lifted the model out of the water bit by bit using a crank and pulley, revealing one layer of the figure at a time. He then carefully chipped away at the block of marble to match what he saw emerging from the water. It's no mistake we have idealistic beliefs about Michelangelo's process. The quote about removing everything that wasn't David seems like something Michelangelo would say because it fits the public image he crafted of himself. Michelangelo was known as the Divine One. He wanted people to believe that he was a gift from God, that his genius was magical and effortless. So much so that, as Michelangelo lay on his deathbed, he ordered piles of his process work and sketches to be burned. He didn't want the world to know how much preparation his genius truly required. I learned from my first fruitful writing session in Costa Rica that it took a certain mind state to make creative progress. I would later master cultivating that mental state in my mornings in Medellin for moments of illumination. But years before that, it was these nighttime research sessions that helped me appreciate the importance of working according to the current stage of the creative problem at hand. Before doing these deep dives, the creative process felt like a crapshoot. I felt like a mouse drowning in cream, frantically moving his little legs in the hopes of turning that cream into butter so I could finally crawl out to safety. But once I gained the confidence to truly immerse myself in the subject at hand, while being comfortable with making no visible progress at all, creating got a lot easier. When I started learning more about the working styles of great creative minds throughout history, I began to see that they all work according to the 4 stages of creativity. Yet, famous stories of moments of illumination still surround these 4 stages with mythology that clouds our view. The 4 stages of yesterday. One of the most famous stories of a moment of illumination is that of how Paul McCartney of the Beatles composed the song Yesterday. As the story goes, he was sleeping in the upstairs bedroom he had recently moved into at his girlfriend's family's house in Wimpole Street in London when a beautiful melody appeared in a dream. He stumbled to the upright piano he kept by the bedside and played the chords so he wouldn't forget them. Thus, one of the greatest pop songs ever was composed. McCartney's story is popular because it makes genius sound easy. All you have to do is sleep and you just might write a hit.
It could be frustrating to think of genius as random, fleeting, and impossible to replicate, but that too appeals to our lazy side. The same way people expect to win the lottery, it plays into our tendency to daydream. It's okay if we aren't putting in the time and doing the work every day. One day, we might strike rich. The part of the story you don't hear is that all 4 stages of creativity were heavily involved in making Yesterday a hit. Yesterday didn't come to McCartney randomly, and when it did come to him, it wasn't ready to ship. When McCartney first dreamt up his untitled melody, he was convinced he had heard it before. "My dad used to know a lot of old jazz tunes," McCartney later recalled. "I thought maybe I just remembered it from the past." McCartney did an enormous amount of verification before recording Yesterday, to be sure it was an original melody. At the time, there was no way for him to simply hum the tune and let an algorithm do the searching for him, as he could do today with an app. He later said that to verify that the melody was original, he went around for weeks playing the chords of the song for people. In fact, it would be an entire year and a half before McCartney would finally record Yesterday. He was trying to figure out if it was an original melody, he was working on details of the arrangement. At this point, the song didn't even have lyrics. He played it for so many people and brought it up at so many practices and recording sessions, bandmate Harrison said, "He's always talking about that song. You'd think he was Beethoven or somebody." As if he were climbing the wooded hills in sunny weather, the final piece of McCartney's yet untitled melody finally achieved the form you would recognize today when McCartney was riding the hills of the Portuguese countryside in the back seat of an Opel Capitan. He was taking a break to vacation in a sleepy fishing village on the south coast of Portugal, one of the few places on the planet where a beetle wouldn't be mobbed. It was during this moment of relaxation, as McCartney and his girlfriend, actress Jane Asher, were rolling over rough and dusty roads, past cork oak and olive trees, the sun setting over the Mirror River, that words started to appear in McCartney's head. One-word verse openings were coming to him, merrily, funnily, suddenly, and the final name of what was to become one of the top-grossing and most covered songs in history, Yesterday. After this moment of illumination, Yesterday still needed more verification. When McCartney arrived in Albufeira, he visited the vacation home of musician Bruce Welch. He asked Welch for a guitar. It was a right-handed guitar, so the left-handed McCartney had to flip it over and play it upside down. McCartney pulled out a brown envelope with words scribbled on it and began to play and sing. Welch later recalled, "I think I was the first person to hear the song with the lyrics. I realized it was magic with those chord progressions." Less than 2 weeks later, a year and a half after the melody came to McCartney in a dream, the Beatles began recording Yesterday in London's EMI studios. Like bookends, the story of how McCartney composed Yesterday is a story of 2 separate moments of illumination. Along the way, there were countless moments of verification and preparation. But those moments alone weren't enough to bring the song to completion. Between those moments, and even leading up to McCartney's fateful dream, the project was undergoing incubation.
How incubation works. Incubation occurs anytime you aren't actively working on the problem. When you are actively working on a problem, you're bound to hit blocks. Scientists call them impasses. If you're trying to connect concepts with one another to form new ideas, many of the connections you try aren't going to work. Additionally, you'll have loose ends, new information about the problem or potential solutions that you haven't yet tried to connect to anything else. During times when you aren't actively working on the problem, a number of things are working in the background to bring you closer to a solution. One way incubation works is simply by helping us forget bad ideas. When you hit an impasse, it's often because you're using too much of your brain power on connections that won't lead you to a solution. It's like a logjam. You're using your working memory to test out connections that aren't going to work. As long as those bad ideas are jammed together, creativity can't flow. Remember when we were solving the word triad in the previous chapter? The first word we thought of that went with the cue word pine was tree, but in the context of this word triad, tree was a bad idea. Once we thought of tree, we became fixated on it, which made it hard to think of the actual solution word, apple. If we had taken a break after thinking of tree, chances are we would have forgotten it, which would have freed us up to think of apple. When incubation helps us forget something that's causing an impasse, scientists call this fixation forgetting. Incubation helps you forget bad ideas, which makes room for good ideas. Besides simply forgetting bad ideas, another way incubation works is through memory consolidation. This is essentially getting your backstage actors out of your short-term memory of the stage and into the long-term memory of the audience. Sleep, in particular, helps us consolidate memories of the relationship between concepts. If I tell you that Tom is taller than Jill, but Jill is taller than Jerry, you'll better understand the implied relationships between the three after you've taken a nap or slept through the night. You'd be more likely to remember that Tom is taller than Jerry, even though I didn't explicitly tell you that. You know that Tom is taller than Jill, and Jill is taller than Jerry. Thanks to memory consolidation, you can more readily deduce that Tom must be taller than Jerry. Relational memory, as scientists call it, is essential to making creative works. To make novel and useful connections, you need to connect concepts that seem to be unrelated. It's the deft arrangement of those concepts into a hierarchy, much like knowing that Tom is taller than Jerry, that makes a creative work evocative and interesting. If you're writing a mystery novel, you'll spoil the ending if you reveal clues that make it too obvious who was the killer. If you're designing an app, you need to arrange the buttons on the interface to express the most commonly used and least commonly used functions of the app. If you're choreographing a dance, you need to balance and contrast the movements you choose so that some movements are heightened and others are subdued in ways that harmonize or create tension with the music. This is why when choreographer, composer, and music theater director Meredith Monk is working on a piece, she draws charts and maps to help her process how the elements of the piece interact. All of this requires relational memory. You need to see the peaks and valleys and learn the lay of the land before you can express only the most relevant details into a map that leads others where you want them to go. You can't do it at first glance. You'll be too focused on details that distract from the story or dance steps that are too on the nose. You need some incubation before you reach the point of illumination. Studies suggest that a final way that incubation occurs is through unconscious processing. Even when you aren't consciously thinking about something, your brain is incredibly active, something scientists call the default mode network. You might think of it as your unconscious or subconscious mind. When you aren't consciously working on the problem, your brain isn't only forgetting the bad ideas, it's not only storing relevant concepts in long-term memory, it's not only identifying relationships amongst those concepts, it may also be subconsciously searching for solutions. Respect the 4 stages. Many people dream of melodies they haven't heard before. I know I do, but I lack the musical skill to capture them and turn them into a complete song. If the melody for Yesterday had come to a less skilled creator, someone without so much preparation under their belt, the story would have ended there. A nice song you've never heard of, coming to someone you've never heard of in a dream. But McCartney knew that completed creative works don't come out of nowhere. He spent an entire 1.5 years working on the song before the lyrics finally came to him. It's no wonder that after a morning of writing, Maya Angelou said she tried to put it out of her mind. She created a period of incubation. After dinner, she would read the day's work to her husband, not to hear his comments weren't allowed, but to hear the writing out loud, a form of verification. Ernest Hemingway supposedly said, "Write drunk, edit sober." Even if there's no proof he actually said it, the fact that the quote has spread says something about our collective instinct. The creative process takes place in distinct stages. Stephen King tells aspiring writers to put the first draft of their novel in a drawer,
Then he tells them to not look at it again for 6 weeks. He's making a long period of incubation part of the process. Playwright Lillian Hellman used each night's sleep as incubation. She read the dialogue in her plays out loud each night and again each morning before writing again. She also did an enormous amount of preparation. For one of her plays, she filled her notebooks with over 100,000 words, almost none of those words in her final play. Years before Robert McKee had a name for it, Hellman was already writing from the inside out. Creative projects can be overwhelming. Moments of illumination come suddenly, and before those moments come, it can feel as if there's no end in sight. But if you're aware of the 4 stages of creativity, you can be at peace. Give yourself adequate time and space for preparation, and immerse yourself in the subject. You'll be tempted to try to come up with ideas during this time. Invite the ideas that do come, but don't burn yourself out pushing through a block. Trust that illumination will come next time you're in your creative sweet spot. Give yourself space for incubation. Let the details of your project sink into your long-term memory. Let the bad ideas causing blocks fall away. Let your mind rank the various elements of a project so you can express them clearly. Give your unconscious mind a chance to look for solutions. You can even use incubation strategically. You can prime your brain with clues before sleep, such as in my nighttime research sessions or in Lillian Hellman's nightly review of her plays. Keep the details of verification from interfering with the creative process. When you're trying to achieve illumination, stop yourself from getting caught up in verification. Set aside a separate time to get the details right. Approaching my own work with the knowledge that there are stages of creativity made the creative process go more smoothly and more fruitfully. It led to moments of sheer bliss. Despite not having much experience as a writer, there were moments in writing my first book where I felt like I was made for the process. Yet, still, there were sticking points, times when that bliss gave way to agony and when I felt as if I was trying to push a mountain across a river. The 4 stages made the creative process go more smoothly, yet the realities of day-to-day life got in the way. After another struggle, patterns emerged that reconciled this.